Clearly protecting or preserving something that may or may not be under 3 miles of ice.
There's undoubtedly a time when Antarctica was lush and green. The question is, was it lush and green during the lifetime of the human species?
Yes.
And this is where it gets tricky.
I want to talk about Antarctica. They are clearly protecting or preserving something that may or may not be under 3 miles of ice. There's undoubtedly a time when Antarctica was lush and green. The question is, was it lush and green during the lifetime of the human species? Yes. And this is where it gets tricky. Beneath 2 kilometers of Antarctic ice, far from any base, flight route, or known civilization, scientists just found something that should not exist. Antarctica is the last frontier. It holds our imagination. Old maps that here be monsters. The last remaining territory on the planet that could have such a designation is Antarctica. A geometric structure older than the pyramids, radiating heat, bending signals, and triggering seismic pulses from deep below. The rings of the structure look like the walls of some sort of compound, like something that's been designed in the middle of the Antarctic. So, what in the world is that doing there? Radar scans show perfect 90 degrees angles. Magnetometers spike like there's metal buried under the continent, and a human-sized heat signature appeared above the site. They're working with ground-penetrating radar, and suddenly they locate a large chunk of metal under the ice. Then vanished without a trace. This isn't just a discovery. It might expose something we've never dared to imagine was down there. The radar hit that should not exist. It began with what was supposed to be a routine high-resolution mapping mission over one of the most desolate regions of East Antarctica, a place so far from any base that even supply aircraft avoid its brutal winds. Scientists from the British Antarctic Survey, the University of California, and Norway's Polar Institute were testing an upgraded radar system that could penetrate deeper than anything used before. Technology refined from the same principles behind NASA's Ice Bridge campaigns. These instruments were designed to scan ancient ice layers like pages in a frozen book. But during one sweep, the radar returned something that made the entire station fall silent. Instead of chaotic noise, the screen showed crisp geometric lines. Straight, parallel, and arranged in a grid pattern. Nature doesn't draw straight lines that stretch for hundreds of meters. Glaciers fold, twist, and warp. They don't carve perfect 90 degrees angles underground. At first, the team thought it was a technical glitch. Ground-penetrating radar often struggles with deep ice older than 8,000 years. Echoes bounce, scatter, and distort when they strike layers filled with volcanic ash or ancient air bubbles. But then the system passed over the same point again, and the anomaly sharpened. Even stranger, the density reading suggested the buried object was heavier than the surrounding bedrock, closer to compact basalt or engineered stone than the sediment normally found beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet. Fun fact: music, Antarctica hides over 130 volcanoes beneath its ice. Yet, none of their lava flows form structures with right angles. This fact alone eliminated one of the simplest natural explanations on day one. As the scientists verified the anomaly through seismic pulses, similar to the techniques used to reveal the hidden Gambert Mountains, they discovered that the returning waves bounced back too cleanly. The object wasn't jagged or eroded. It had flat surfaces. Even more intriguing, the ice directly above the anomaly showed an unusual thermal signature. In glaciology, warm spots beneath ancient ice often indicate past geothermal activity. But this signature was too uniform, almost as if the object itself once emitted heat. Some researchers recalled a lesser-known fun fact from paleoclimate studies. Certain pockets of East Antarctica were partially ice-free 12,000 to 14,000 years ago, according to reconstructions published in Nature. If that is true, whatever sits beneath the ice could have stood above ground before being swallowed by the last major cooling phase. And that theory, already controversial, was only the beginning. The magnetic anomaly nobody saw coming. As the radar images continued pouring in, something unexpected began to surface. This time from magnetometer data. These instruments, which measure minute fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field, are often used in geological surveys to detect iron-rich formations or buried metal structures, but in this case, the readings around the buried Antarctic anomaly were off. The values spiked into the abnormal range, registering a magnetic field intensity nearly 300 times higher than the surrounding ice bed, consistent with highly magnetized material. Even more bizarre, the distortion wasn't scattered like one would expect from random mineral deposits. It was concentrated in a symmetrical ring, encircling the structure like a magnetic halo. This sparked an entirely different level of debate. Was the structure built with materials capable of generating magnetic fields? Some compared it to the natural magnetic anomalies seen in Siberia's Tunguska region or Canada's Hudson Baritone, both, music, sites where magnetic readings remain a mystery to this day. But what made the Antarctic case so puzzling was the geometry. Real-world magnetic anomalies usually form as blobs, arcs, or distorted waves. But this one aligned almost perfectly with the edges of the radar-mapped formation beneath the ice. That's when something curious happened. A small group of geophysicists familiar with data from Cold War-era United States Navy scans of Antarctica began comparing the new findings to declassified magnetic surveys conducted in the 1950s. Shockingly, the magnetic blip had been there for decades, but dismissed as instrumentation error, largely due to the primitive nature of the equipment. Back then, the area was just blank ice with no known geological significance. Now it was back on the radar, literally and figuratively. Theories began pouring in. One proposal suggested the structure might contain iron alloys or magnetite-rich stone, possibly indicating human construction or tools. Another floated the idea that the structure was ancient but technologically advanced, perhaps even designed with deliberate magnetic alignment to true south, like how some Egyptian pyramids aligned to cardinal directions. Some theorists even referenced the Wilksand gravity anomaly, a massive impact-like structure under East Antarctica linked by some fringe researchers to a lost continent or a massive underground facility, and while that claim remains highly debated, the uncanny overlap in location began turning heads. The strange fossilized pollen found in ice above the structure. While radar and magnetometer data were sending shock waves through the scientific world, the ice core samples taken from directly above the buried structure revealed something just as baffling, but biological, not technological. As glaciologists analyzed the fine particulate trapped in the ancient ice, they discovered fossilized pollen grains, tiny, well-preserved remnants of plant life embedded in layers dated to nearly 12,000 years ago. The fossils that we sampled in Shah Drill are all microscopic. And the most important ones were the fossil pollen that comes from the vegetation that used to live on the Atacama. Now, pollen and ice isn't unheard of. Wind can carry microscopic spores for thousands of miles, but these weren't from modern-day flora or from wind-blown surface contamination. These grains identified through scanning electron microscopy and chemical isotope analysis belong to temperate plant species, grasses, shrubs, and even flowering plants that no longer exist anywhere in Antarctica. Several matched extinct genotypes known only from fossil beds in Tasmania and the southern tip of South America. That changed everything. These pollen grains were located in a layer just a few meters above the depth where the radar anomaly begins, meaning the region had to have been ice-free or at least partially exposed at the time those plants were living. And not only that, the distribution of the pollen was unusually dense, far beyond what would be expected from airborne transport. That suggests the vegetation was growing locally. Researchers from the University of Bern and the Alfred Wegener Institute Cross referenced the discovery with earlier studies of Lake Vasto in the Transantarctic Mountains, which had previously hinted at a greener Antarctica during parts of the late Plein. But those were always speculative. This was hard physical evidence trapped in the ice directly above a possible artificial structure. The implications were staggering. If flowering plants once grew near the structure, it meant the region had experienced a brief habitable window long enough for ecosystems to bloom. That in turn would suggest humans or human-like species could have lived or at least traveled there during that window. The presence of local vegetation would provide food, shelter, and potentially wood or plant-based tools now long decayed. The forgotten. 1962 satellite photo that was quietly reclassified. As modern researchers continued scanning and drilling in East Antarctica, one glaciologist from the University of Oslo made a strange connection that others had overlooked. While reviewing historical satellite archives for atmospheric comparison, she stumbled upon a declassified set of corona reconnaissance satellite photos from the early 1960s. The same Cold War program originally launched by the CIA to spy on the Soviet Union. But one high-altitude image taken on October 3, 1962 stood out. Captured during a rare clear sky moment over East Antarctica, the image showed a subtle rectangular depression on the surface of the ice nearly half a kilometer wide in the exact same coordinates now associated with the buried structure. At the time, this anomaly was dismissed as a snow dune or shadow distortion, and the image was filed away without deeper inspection, but here's the twist. 3 months after the photo was logged, the entire reel was quietly reclassified, removed from public access, and only recently re-released under a bulk CIA declassification initiative in 2019. When the 2023 research team superimposed the 1962 photo over the present-day radar and seismic maps, the depression aligned perfectly with the edge of the formation, now believed to be some sort of chambered structure. What does this mean? One theory suggests the ice above the object may have temporarily thinned or partially collapsed, possibly due to geothermal venting or structural movement beneath. This brief surface deformation, caught purely by accident in 1962, may have been the only visible sign of the anomaly before it was buried again by shifting snowfall and glacial drift. Another theory is far more provocative. Some believe early United States military analysts may have recognized the geometric shape and intentionally suppressed the photo, especially as Antarctica was under growing scrutiny due to the Antarctic Treaty signed just 1 year earlier in 1961. The 12 nations signed a formal treaty. The treaty provides that for the next 30 years, the continent is to be used by all of mankind, but only for scientific or peaceful purposes. If true, that would make this the first known human documentation of the buried structure, 6 decades before anyone admitted it existed. Historians and image analysts are now re-examining thousands of old U-2 spy plane and corona satellite images, hoping for more overlooked clues. The ice quake that shouldn't have happened. Just as drilling teams were preparing to deploy subglacial robots to get the first physical look at the buried formation, seismic monitoring stations stationed across East Antarctica registered something chilling. A deep low-frequency ice quake directly beneath the site of the anomaly. Unlike surface ice quakes caused by cracking glaciers or kveing ice shelves, this one came from well below the 2 km thick ice sheet, and the pattern didn't match any known natural stress signature. According to seismic data shared by the International Polar Foundation and confirmed by the Antarctic Seismographic Data Acquisition Team, the tremor occurred at a depth of nearly 2.3 kilometers, lasting approximately 11 seconds and releasing a focused burst of energy, as if something had shifted or moved beneath the structure. Most subglacial tremors are chaotic and jagged. This one was symmetrical, clean, and unusually silent on nearby acoustic recorders. No prior creaking, no microshocks, just a sudden, precise release. What made it more puzzling was the timing. The tremor occurred just 3 hours after a radar-based seismic pulse scan was performed over the structure with amplified gain settings. A scan that used low-frequency waveforms capable of penetrating thick ice and bedrock. Some experts now wonder whether the pulse scan meant to get a clearer three-dimensional map of the structure may have inadvertently disturbed something buried within or awakened a fragile stress zone surrounding it. Theories quickly multiplied. One camp believes the ice quake might be a natural reaction to climate-induced basal melt, possibly connected to geothermal hotspots known to exist beneath certain Antarctic valleys like the one under the Thoait Glacier. But the heat maps showed no increase in temperature or meltwater release. Another group proposed the idea of void collapse, a possible empty chamber beneath the structure that finally gave way under pressure. And then there's the quiet theory circulating among engineers at the European Sub-Ice Survey Group that the quake wasn't collapse at all, but a mechanical shift, like a door or seal moving under pressure. One internal report referenced something called seismic harmonics, normally seen in engineered spaces like tunnels or mines, not ice caves. To this day, no one has explained the precise geometry or energy signature of that quake. The forbidden core sample labeled Void Return 2b. While most of the public attention focused on the radar grids, seismic echoes, and magnetic anomalies, few noticed an obscure line in a leaked logistics report from the 2024 to 2025 East Antarctic Research Initiative listing core samples drilled near the anomaly. Among them was a peculiar entry, Void Return 2b, sample sealed under restricted review. Unlike other ice cores catalogued with depth, isotopic markers, and transport temperature, this one had a redacted GPS tag, and an unusual note, volatile material detected, thermal lock required. The document, which briefly appeared on a shared data portal before vanishing, caught the eye of an independent climate geochemist in Geneva, who archived a copy. After comparing metadata with other Antarctic cores from the same depth range, she realized something strange. The thermal signature at the 2B drill depth did not match standard glacial layering. Instead, it reflected a sudden shift in temperature gradient consistent with either a pocket of trapped heat or material with active chemical properties. And here's the bizarre part. Gas chromatograph traces showed elevated levels of isobutane and xenon. Rare gases not typically associated with ancient ice, but often linked to synthetic environments, controlled atmospheres, or deeply buried geothermal vents. To be clear, these gases aren't what you find in natural glacier melt. They suggested a sealed environment, protected from outside contamination for thousands of years, but somehow still chemically alive. Adding fuel to the fire, 2 technicians involved in the analysis were reportedly reassigned and bound under non-disclosure agreements, citing classified cross-agency involvement. That only made the community whisper louder. Some speculated the sample came from an ancient ventilation shaft or thermal pocket, possibly a subglacial chamber preserved since the structure was first buried. Others floated a wilder theory that it came from a space not formed by ice, but preserved by design, perhaps an enclosed corridor, room, or vault still holding its internal atmosphere. The radio silence zone surrounding the site. As global attention turned toward the strange structure buried beneath 2 kilometers of Antarctic ice, another anomaly emerged. This time from the edge of human communication itself. Satellite teams monitoring standard telemetry and communication uplinks from the East Antarctic Research Grid began noticing intermittent signal dropouts near the structure's coordinates. At first, they blamed solar weather, but the Solar Dynamics Observatory recorded no disturbances at the time. What made it even more unusual was how localized the blackout was. High-frequency radio bands used for internal drone telemetry, environmental sensors, and seismic array relays were failing specifically within a 3.5 km radius of the anomaly. Data packets sent into the zone would either disappear entirely or return corrupted, showing classic patterns of multipath interference, as if something was bending or refracting the signal unnaturally. The phenomenon was quickly dubbed the radio silence zone by internal communications at the Norwegian-led Polar Telecom Lab, which supports research infrastructure in that sector. Now, here's where it gets disturbing. When scientists switched to shortwave VLF and even ultra-low-frequency backup systems, some of the most reliable communications in extreme environments, the blackout persisted. Notably, VLF signals, which can penetrate seawater and even parts of the Earth's crust, began echoing, returning distorted fragments of their own signal with a delay of exactly 2.73 seconds, as if they were bouncing off something structured and layered beneath the ice. This is virtually unheard of in glacial environments normally. Radar and radio signals scatter unpredictably in thick ice. But here, the signals were reflecting cleanly, too cleanly. And some researchers began suggesting the presence of a reflective surface or engineered material beneath the anomaly. A kind of buried architecture, possibly metallic or crystal-like, capable of deflecting or absorbing electromagnetic waves. Even more strange, autonomous drones tasked with flying over the site experienced compass drift and IMU, inertial measurement unit instability despite clear weather and full satellite visibility. One drone, part of a Swiss mapping team, was forced to perform an emergency auto-return when its altitude sensors started reading negative elevation as if it were flying underground despite still being in the air. The human-shaped thermal signature detected near midnight. Amid the growing tension and global debate surrounding the structure, a team from the German Aerospace Center deployed a high-altitude thermal balloon to gather long-exposure infrared imagery of the ice field above the anomaly. These balloons, equipped with advanced FLIR, forward-looking infrared radiometer systems, are typically used to map geothermal hotspots and detect subglacial lakes. But on the night of July 3, 2025, during a routine atmospheric survey, the camera captured something that should have been impossible. At 0:27 UTC, for a duration of 38 seconds, a bipedal heat signature appeared on the frozen surface less than 400 m from the center of the anomaly. It was upright, human-sized, and emitted thermal readings too warm to be from wildlife, far too symmetrical to be a drifting ice formation, and with movement that appeared deliberate. The figure moved approximately 11 m, paused, and then vanished, leaving no footprints, no drag marks, and no residual thermal trail, as confirmed by time-lapse follow-up scans just minutes later. At first, the team assumed it was a glitch or software ghosting, but image analysts at the Max Planck Institute confirmed the data's integrity and dismissed image stitching errors. Cross-referencing satellite records showed no registered expeditions, no snowmobiles, no